You've got the plans, you've got the crew, you've got the money, and you've got a deadline that's already breathing down your neck. So, why wait weeks or even months for a piece of paper from some government office? Why can't you just start building without a permit? The answer is simple. You can. But you really, really shouldn't. Because that piece of paper isn't just red tape. It's a shield. It's a warning system. And when you build without it, you're not saving time. You're buying a ticket to a world of pain that most homeowners and even some contractors never see coming. Let's start with the obvious. Building permits exist for one fundamental reason: safety. Your local building department isn't trying to ruin your weekend or delay your dream project. Their job is to make sure that when you add that new bedroom, that deck, that garage, or that commercial space, it doesn't collapse, catch fire, or electrocute someone. As Dr. John Schaufelberger, author of Management of Construction Projects, once noted, building codes represent the minimum standard of construction required to protect the public health, safety, and welfare. Minimum. That's the key word. The permit is the gatekeeper for that minimum standard. But here's where it gets interesting. The permit process isn't just about making sure your framing is up to code, it's about something far more powerful, something that most people completely overlook. It's about establishing a baseline. Think about it. When you pull a permit, a building inspector comes to your site at critical moments. They check your footings before you pour concrete. They check your framing before you cover it with drywall. They check your electrical work before you flip the switch. That inspection isn't a nuisance. It's a second set of eyes. And those eyes have seen things you haven't. They've seen decks collapse because the ledger wasn't flashed properly. They've seen walls bow because the foundation wasn't deep enough. They've seen entire roofs lift off because the hurricane ties were missing. You think you know what you're doing. And maybe you do. But the inspector has seen the mistakes of 1,000 other people who thought the same thing. So, what happens when you skip that step? When you build without a permit, you're not just breaking the law, you're gambling with your life and your money. Let's talk about the money. Because that's what really gets people's attention. You might save a few $1,000s in permit fees. You might save a few weeks of waiting. But when the county finds out what you've done, and they will find out, the cost of fixing your mistake can be 10 times what you saved. As the Construction Management Association of America emphasizes, construction is a high-risk business, and the best way to mitigate that risk is through proper planning and compliance. Here's a real-world scenario. You build a beautiful new addition to your home. No permit, no inspections. It looks perfect. You're proud of yourself. 6 months later, you decide to sell the house. The buyer's inspector notices the new addition. He asks for the permit. You don't have one, the sale falls through, and now you're stuck with a house you can't sell, a mortgage you can't afford, and a county official who wants to have a conversation with you about your unauthorized construction. That conversation typically ends with one of 3 outcomes. First, you can apply for a retroactive permit. That sounds simple enough, but here's the catch. The inspector will require you to open up walls, dig up foundations, and expose every part of the work they couldn't see during construction. That's demolition. That's rework. That's thousands of dollars you never planned to spend. Second, you could be ordered to remove the entire structure. That's right. Tear it all down. Every nail, every board, every hour of work, gone. Third, you could face fines. And not small ones. Some jurisdictions impose fines of up to $10,000 per violation, per day. Suddenly that permit fee doesn't seem so expensive anymore. But wait, there's more. Let's talk about your insurance company. When you build without a permit, you're building without coverage. If that unpermitted addition burns down, your insurance company can deny the claim. If it collapses and injures someone, your liability insurance won't protect you. You're on your own. And that's not even the worst part. The worst part is what happens when you try to sell the house 5, 10 or 20 years down the road. Buyers don't want liability. Real estate agents don't want liability, and your unpermitted work is a giant red flag that kills deals. According to a study by the National Association of Home Builders, unpermitted work is one of the top 3 deal breakers in residential real estate transactions. Deal breakers. That's because title companies and lenders won't touch a property with open permits or unpermitted construction. They require a certificate of occupancy. And you can't get a certificate of occupancy without final inspection sign-off. So your dream project becomes a nightmare that lives with you until you fix it. And fixing it isn't cheap. Now you might be thinking, but I'm a licensed contractor. I know what I'm doing. I don't need some inspector telling me how to build. Here's where the plot thickens. As a contractor, you have even more to lose. When you build without a permit, you're violating state law. The Contractors State License Board takes this very seriously. You can face fines, license suspension, or even license revocation. As Barbara Jackson writes in Construction Management Jumpstart, the consequences of failing to understand the obligations of the contract are significant, and every construction manager must be completely familiar with what constitutes the contract for construction. The permit is part of that contract. When you skip it, you're not just cutting corners. You're breaking the law, you're exposing yourself to lawsuits, you're damaging your reputation. And your reputation is everything. Word travels fast in the construction industry. One unpermitted job leads to a bad review, leads to a lost bid, leads to an empty calendar. There is no upside to building without a permit. None. But let's be honest. The permit process can be frustrating. Delays are common. Fees are high. And sometimes it feels like the building department is working against you. That's why smart contractors do something different. They build the permit process into their schedule from the very beginning. They don't wait until the last minute. They start the application process as soon as they have a signed contract. They allocate time and budget for delays. They build relationships with the inspectors. They treat the permit process as a project in itself, because that's exactly what it is. Consider the work of Dr. Barb Jackson, who emphasizes the importance of due diligence in construction management. The key to delivering a successful project is to start with a really well-defined project scope. A poorly written scope will usually result in a poor response from the contractor. The same applies to the permit process. Plan for it. Budget for it. Respect it. And here's something you might not know. Many building departments now offer expedited permit services. For an additional fee, you can get your permit processed in days instead of weeks. Some jurisdictions even offer same-day permits for simple projects. The point is, there are legal ways to speed things up. Skipping the permit isn't one of them. Now I know what some of you are thinking. What about small projects? What about a quick repair? Do I really need a permit to replace a water heater? In many places, yes, you do. The rule of thumb is simple. If it requires electrical, plumbing, mechanical, or structural work, you probably need a permit. But here's the key question you should always ask yourself. What's the worst that could happen? If you build that deck without a permit and it collapses next year, who's responsible? You are. If that unpermitted electrical work causes a fire, who's liable? You are. If that unpermitted addition makes your house unsellable, who loses? You do. Every single time. The permit process isn't a punishment. It's a protection. It's a promise that someone with knowledge and authority has verified that your project meets the minimum standards of safety. And that's worth more than the time or money you think you're saving. Let me leave you with this. The next time you're tempted to start a project without a permit, I want you to stop and ask yourself one question. What's your timeline worth? Because the 6 weeks you spend waiting for that permit is nothing compared to the 6 months you'll spend fixing what goes wrong. The few $1,000s you save in fees is nothing compared to the tens of thousands you'll spend in fines, demolition, and lost property value. And the stress of dealing with an inspector is nothing compared to the stress of dealing with a lawsuit. Building without a permit is playing a game you can't win. So do yourself a favor, pull the permit, get the inspections. Build it right. Because when you build with a permit, you're not just following the rules, you're protecting everything that matters, your safety, your money, your home, your reputation, and that's something you can't afford to lose.